I'm Marilyn Bradford with the Bradford System of Right Recovery, and I'd like to speak with you today about what I call the language of addiction and abuse. Now, all of you speak some language that you learned in your family growing up. I mean, I speak English because my parents spoke English. You may speak Swedish or you may speak German because that's what your parents spoke. But many of us also speak another language, and that is the language of addiction and abuse. It's actually a kind of a behavioral language, but we learned it the same way we learned our speaking language. So for instance, I was working with a man who had a real problem with rage and anger. In fact, he self-described as being addicted to rage. And he's like, I don't get it, Marilyn. I agreed when I left my father's house that I was never going to do that again. I was never going to treat people that way. And yet I find myself doing it. And I'm like, well, that's a language, a behavioral language you learned in your family. That was the only way you were taught that you could address any form of frustration or deal with people when you were irritated. You didn't know that there was another way to behave, another behavioral language that was available to you. So once we began looking at that, he could really get out of the wrongness of him and see why that had been his only choice. Now, some people come to me with addictions. Like I had a woman come to me with an addiction to alcohol, and she said, I don't get it, Marilyn. I didn't have any addiction in my family. But when we started looking at it, we noticed a couple of things. Her father was actually a workaholic, which is to say he worked often 16 hours a day, was rarely home, didn't participate in family things, didn't participate with his kids. And his mom, or her mom, was actually addicted to fixing other people's problems. So she was always off doing that. So what my client learned was that you have to disappear into something. That's the behavioral language that she learned. And what she disappeared into was alcohol. Just because her addiction is not socially acceptable, whereas her parents' addictions are addictions that were rewarded by the culture, she made herself wrong and didn't really understand that's actually all the same thing. Addiction is about where you disappear and where you don't exist and where you go to so you're not available for yourself and other people. So I'd like to ask you, take a look and see what kind of language, behavioral language, of addiction and or abuse your family spoke. What did you pick up? And please know it's just something that you picked up. You can change it just the same way that if you grew up speaking English and decided to learn Swahili, you could learn Swahili and change that. So whatever you did learn, it's all changeable.